how one man's radical tactic broke the German Air Force. In the autumn of 1943, high over the industrial heartland of Nazi Germany, the sky is a charnel house. For the young men crewing the American B-17s and B-24s of the 8th Air Force, every single mission is a spin of the roulette wheel. The odds of completing a full 25-mission tour were terrifyingly low. They weren't just flying into enemy territory, they were flying into a meticulously engineered wall of steel and fire thrown up by the German Luftwaffe. The strategy was simple: pummel Germany's war machine into submission from the air. But the cost was becoming unbearable. The bomber streams were being bled white day after day by swarms of German fighters that would appear as if from nowhere, attacking with chilling savagery. All the while, American fighter escorts, bound by rigid orders to stick close to the bombers, were little more than helpless bodyguards, forced to watch the carnage unfold. The Luftwaffe seemed unbreakable. So how did it all change? How did the tide of the entire air war turn? It wasn't some new wonder weapon or a massive surge in production. It was an idea, a single, revolutionary idea born in the mind of one commander, a man who decided the rulebook was for a game they were losing. He devised a tactic so radical, so contrary to his standing orders, that it bordered on heresy. Yet, this one tactic, known as the Khe Sanh, would not only help save the bomber fleets, but would unleash the full fury of American air power, break the back of the Luftwaffe, and make his 56th Fighter Group a name whispered in fear by German pilots for the rest of the war. This is the story of how one innovative idea and the sheer audacity to implement it changed everything. To understand the genius of the solution, you first have to stare into the abyss of the problem. And in 1943, that abyss was 25,000 feet deep and stretched all the way to Berlin. The American daylight bombing campaign was, on paper, a masterpiece. While the British bombed by night, the Americans would deliver precision strikes by day, dismantling the German war industry one factory at a time. The centerpiece of this strategy was the B-17 Flying Fortress. Bristling with up to 13 50 caliber machine guns, these bombers flew in tight, interlocking combat box formations. The idea was that their overlapping fields of fire would create an impenetrable fortress of lead that no fighter would dare enter. It was a great theory. In practice, it was a death sentence. The Germans weren't idiots. Their tacticians were brilliant and ruthless. They didn't just throw planes at the bombers. They developed a brutally effective system. Their fighters would assemble in huge formations, sometimes over 100 aircraft, far outside the range of the American escorts. This massive battle group, or Gefechtsverband, was guided by ground controllers tracking the bombers. Once they had the numbers and the positioning, they would strike. And they wouldn't come from the sides or the rear, where the B-17's guns were thickest. They came from 12 o'clock high, head-on. Imagine you're a 20-year-old in the cockpit of a B-17. You've been flying for hours, cold seeping into your bones, the drone of the engines a mind-numbing hum. Then, the call. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. You look up, and the sky ahead is suddenly filled with black specks. They get bigger and bigger, resolving into Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt Bf-9s. They're coming at you abreast, a massive wave of cannon-armed fighters, their wings twinkling as they open fire from outside the effective range of your machine guns. Your 50 cals are slow firing and meant for hitting crossing targets, not for something screaming toward you at a combined speed of over 500 miles per hour. The German cannons, meanwhile, fire explosive shells. One good burst into the cockpit, an engine, or a wing root, and it's over. The attack is terrifyingly quick. A pass lasts mere seconds, and then they're gone, looping around to hit you again. And where were the American fighters? They were there, but they were handcuffed. The doctrine of an 8-fighter command was close escort. The P-47 Thunderbolts were ordered to stay with the bombers, acting as a protective shield. Their job was to react. But against massed, head-on attacks, reacting was useless. By the time the German fighters were close enough to engage, they were already firing on the bombers. The P-47s could chase one or two, but the main attack would always punch through and savage the formation. Raids like the one on Schweinfurt in October 1943 were a massacre, with 60 B-17s shot out of the sky in a single day. The numbers were unsustainable. The strategy was failing. The bomber crews knew it. They were bait, and the escorts, chained to them by doctrine, could do little more than watch them die. A new approach was needed, and it would come from a man who had seen enough. Enter Colonel Hubert "Hub" Zemke. At 28 years old, he was a former Golden Gloves boxer with a face that looked like it was carved from granite and a disposition to match. He was disciplined, demanding, and had a mind that was constantly analyzing and looking for an edge. Zemke was a student of air combat. Before America even entered the war, he'd been sent to England as an observer with the RAF and to the Soviet Union to train their pilots. He'd seen different ways of fighting, which gave him a healthy skepticism for by-the-book thinking. In 1942, Zemke was given command of the 56th Fighter Group, a new unit filled with green pilots. To make matters worse, they were equipped with a brand new, unproven, and frankly, unloved airplane, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. If you put a P-47 next to a sleek British Spitfire or a German Bf-109, you'd think it was a joke. The Thunderbolt was enormous, the biggest, heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. Pilots called it the Jug because it looked like a giant milk jug. Fully loaded, it weighed up to 8 tons, all built around a massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine. Initially, the pilots of the 56th hated it. The Jug was a pig. It climbed sluggishly, and in a classic, slow-speed, turning dogfight, it was hopelessly outclassed. The group's first missions were, as Zemke himself put it, ignominious. They lost planes and pilots without scoring a single kill. It was a disaster. But Zemke wasn't a man who accepted failure. He and his pilots started to learn their machine. What the Jug lacked in grace, it made up for in brute force and toughness. That massive engine could pull it through the sky at over 400 miles per hour, especially at high altitude. And while it couldn't turn, it could dive like a falcon. Point the nose of a P-47 down, and it would accelerate to astonishing speeds, easily outdiving anything the Germans had. Most importantly, the thing was built like a flying tank. It could soak up an incredible amount of punishment and still bring its pilot home. One pilot, Robert S. Johnson, had his plane riddled with over 20 cannon shells and still managed to fly his crippled Jug back to England. And then there was the firepower. The P-47 carried 8 50 caliber machine guns. When a pilot squeezed the trigger, he unleashed a literal buzzsaw of lead that could shred an enemy fighter in seconds. Zemke drilled his men relentlessly, insisting on absolute discipline. He knew the Jug couldn't fight on the enemy's terms, so he developed tactics that played to its strengths. Boom and zoom. They would use their high-altitude performance to get above the enemy, dive down at incredible speed for one devastating firing pass, and then use that speed to climb back up to safety. Dive, fire, recover. It was the mantra of the 56th. They were learning their plane, but they were still shackled by close escort. They were becoming expert killers, but were being forced to wait for the wolves to get into the sheep pen before they could fight. Zemke knew this was a losing strategy. He was a boxer, and his philosophy was simple. You don't win by just blocking punches. You win by hitting the other guy hard before he can even throw his. He was about to apply that logic to the air war. As 1943 bled into 1944, the situation grew more desperate. The 8th Air Force commanders were wedded to the idea of close escort. Fighters were a visible deterrent, nothing more. Breaking away was forbidden, and pilots could be disciplined for chasing an enemy. The mindset was defensive, reactive, and it was costing hundreds of lives. Zemke saw the flaw. He watched his pilots, flying the most powerful fighters in the sky, circling impotently as German fighters massed and organized their attacks with impunity. Sticking to the bombers was like being a bodyguard who has to wait for the assassin to start shooting before he can draw his gun. It was insane. The Germans had the initiative. They decided where and when to fight. Zemke was determined to take that away from them. His analysis was simple but profound. Why wait for the Germans to form up? Why not go out and hit them? While they were forming up, why not ambush the ambushers? From this, the Zemke fan was born. The concept was audacious. Instead of having the entire group cling to the bombers, Zemke proposed sending his squadrons out ahead of them. The squadrons would fan out in a wide arc, sweeping the airspace for miles in front of the approaching bombers. They would become hunters. Their mission was no longer to wait, but to actively seek and destroy German fighters before they could even get organized. This was heresy. It flew in the face of established doctrine. It meant deliberately sending his fighters far away from the bombers they were supposed to protect. If he was wrong, if the Germans slipped past his fan, the bombers would be defenseless, and the blame would land squarely on him. It was a career-ending gamble. The arrival of General Jimmy Doolittle as the new 8th Air Force commander in early 1944 was the final piece of the puzzle. Doolittle was an aggressive leader, and one of his first acts was to unleash the fighters. The new doctrine stated that the fighters' primary mission was the destruction of the Luftwaffe, wherever it could be found. While bomber protection was still key, Doolittle understood that the best way to protect them was to eliminate the threat. This gave Zemke the top cover he needed. His radical idea now had a degree of official sanction, even if the specific fan tactic was still his own unproven invention. On May 12, 1944, they put it to the test. The men of the 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, flew out ahead of the bombers, fanned out across the hostile German sky, and went hunting. The air war over Europe was about to change forever. That first full-scale trial of the Zemke fan on May 12, 1944, was brutal. Zemke himself was leading a flight of 4 P-47s when they were jumped by 7 German Bf-109s. The German leader, in a stunning display of marksmanship, sliced across their defensive circle and shot down a wingman. Moments later, he did it again, crippling a second Thunderbolt. Zemke was suddenly terrifyingly alone. He threw his jug into a violent dive, firewalling the throttle to escape. Years later, he learned the pilot who had so thoroughly decimated his flight was Major Gunther Rall, the third highest scoring ace in history. But while Zemke was fighting for his life, his theory was being proven correct. Elsewhere in the fan, other elements of the 56th were finding exactly what Zemke had promised: German fighters trying to form up. Completely unprepared for an attack, the Wolfpack tore into them. Instead of a coordinated assault on the bombers, the Germans were scattered, fighting for their own lives. The 56th was dictating the terms. That day, the group claimed 18 enemy aircraft destroyed. One pilot, Bob Rankin, shot down 5 of them, becoming an ace in a day. The Zemke fan worked. From then on, Zemke's Wolfpack became the terror of the Luftwaffe. They turned the skies over Germany into their personal hunting ground. Their boom and zoom tactic was their signature. They'd orbit high above German assembly points, sun at their backs. When the enemy appeared below, the call would go out, and the thunderbolts would roll over and plunge downwards. Imagine being a young Luftwaffe pilot, forming up for a textbook attack. Suddenly, your wingman's plane explodes. You look up, nothing. Then another plane from your formation is shredded. Panic. From out of the sun, diving at nearly 500 miles per hour, come the jugs. They are on you and through your formation in a heartbeat. Their 850 cals creating a wall of lead. You don't see them until it's too late. The psychological effect was devastating. The Luftwaffe pilots, once the confident masters of their domain, were now the prey. The aces of the 56th became legends. There was Francis Gaby Gabreski, who would end the war as the top American ace in Europe with 28 aerial victories. There was Robert S. Johnson, who on May 8, 1944, shot down 2 fighters, bringing his total to 27 and surpassing the World War I record of the legendary Eddie Rickenbacker. The 56th produced an incredible 39 aces in total. The group's success was staggering. During one raid, the Wolfpack shattered the record for a single mission, claiming 23 confirmed kills. On another to Berlin, they downed 27 German planes. When the new, sleeker P-51 Mustang began arriving, most groups jumped at the chance to switch. The 56th refused. They stuck with their beloved, rugged jugs, becoming the only group in the 8th Air Force to fly the P-47 for the entire war. They had mastered the machine, and combined with Zemke's tactics, they had become the most effective killing force in the European theater. The impact of the aggressive tactics pioneered by Zemke and sanctioned by Doolittle was catastrophic for the Luftwaffe. The German fighter arm, designed as a defensive shield, was being systematically dismantled. Their veteran pilots, the Experten, were being killed off at an alarming rate in a war of attrition they simply could not win. Large-scale assaults on bomber streams became nearly impossible, as the Wolfpack and other fighter groups smashed their formations before they were even complete. As a result, bomber losses plummeted. By early 1945, the entire 8th Air Force had adopted aggressive fighter sweeps as standard procedure, with the pioneering tactics of men like Zemke leading the way. The heretical idea of one colonel had become a key part of the doctrine that would ensure Allied air superiority. Zemke's own war came to a strange end. In October 1944, while flying a P-51 Mustang on a trial run, his plane twisted apart in severe turbulence. He bailed out over enemy territory, was captured, and spent the rest of the war as the senior officer in Stalag Luftwaffe, the same POW camp holding many of his own captured pilots. But his legacy was secure. By the end of the war, the 56th Fighter Group's final tally was astonishing: 665.5 enemy aircraft destroyed in the air and another 311 on the ground. Their total was more than any other fighter group in the 8th Air Force. They produced more aces than any other group, including the top two in the European theater. The story of Hub Zemke and the 56th Fighter Group is more than a tale of air combat. It's a powerful lesson in leadership and innovation. It shows how one person, willing to challenge convention, can change the course of history. Zemke didn't just find a new answer to the problem, he asked a different question. He didn't ask, "How can we better defend the bombers?" He asked, "How can we destroy the enemy before they even get close?" It was a fundamental shift from a defensive mindset to an offensive one, from reacting to the enemy to making the enemy react to you. The history of World War II is full of these moments of incredible courage and innovation. If you enjoyed this story of how Zemke's Wolfpack helped break the Luftwaffe, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And let us know in the comments, what other forgotten tactics or unsung heroes of history do you think deserve their own story? We read all your suggestions. The legacy of the Zemke fan is written in the clear skies over Europe in 1945, in the countless bomber crews who came home because the wolves were no longer at the door, and in the record books where the 56th Fighter Group stands as the top-scoring American fighter group in the European theater. It proves that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't new technology, but a new way of thinking. Hubert Zemke's radical idea didn't just give his pilots an edge, it gave them the initiative. He unleashed the hunters, and the Luftwaffe never recovered.